The Albatross of Alameda, Building the Spruce Goose. Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. This wasn't an inspirational quote taped to the wall of a Silicon Valley startup. This was the fierce, unyielding credo of Howard Hughes, a man whose every ambition was measured against the impossible. In the dark, desperate years of World War II, with German U-boats sinking Allied transports faster than Liberty ships could be built, the American war effort needed a miracle, an aerial leviathan, a cargo ship of the sky, capable of lifting thousands of troops or tons of materiel across the oceans safely above the submarine wolf packs. The challenge wasn't just to build the biggest airplane the world had ever seen. It was to build an airplane out of the wrong materials, by a man who was already losing the public's trust and under the eye of a skeptical, war-weary Congress. It was a story of genius and madness, of engineering triumph and crippling obsession, all culminating in a single, solitary flight that would define the limits of human ambition, the saga of the Hughes H-4 Hercules, forever known as the Spruce Goose. I. The Necessity of the Impossible, 1942. In 1942, the Atlantic was a graveyard. Every day, the news from the convoys was grimmer. The Battle of the Atlantic was turning against the Allies. German Admiral Karl Donit's U-boats were sinking up to 50 American and British merchant ships a month, severing the lifeline of men and supplies critical to the war effort in Europe. The urgency was palpable in Washington, D.C., where shipbuilding was being pushed to its absolute limit. But there was a problem no steel hull could solve: exposure. A surface ship, however fast, was a vulnerable target for months. The military needed a way to leapfrog the ocean danger, a transport system that could carry massive payloads through the air. Enter Henry J. Kaiser. Known as the miracle man of American industry, Kaiser was the industrialist who had perfected the assembly line technique for shipbuilding, slashing the time it took to build a Liberty ship from months to mere weeks. He was a visionary, but even he understood the limits of his shipyard. His solution lay not in the water, but in the sky, and he proposed a concept that stunned the military brass: the construction of a fleet of massive flying boats. Kaiser needed a partner. He needed an aircraft designer who was not just an engineer, but a maverick, someone with the ego and the financial resources to swallow the immense risk. He needed a man who could see past the limitations of convention. He needed Howard Hughes. Hughes, at 37, was already an American legend. He was a wealthy industrialist, a pioneering aviator, a successful movie producer, and a notorious playboy. He held the airspeed record and had personally designed and built several record-breaking aircraft, including the H-1 Racer. He was not a man to be told no, particularly by gravity. In a landmark meeting, Kaiser presented his idea to Hughes. The military commission, led by the Defense Plant Corporation, DPC, was offering a contract to build 3 enormous flying boats. These aircraft had to be capable of transporting 750 fully equipped troops or 2 Sherman tanks, an unprecedented payload. Built primarily of non-strategic materials. Steel and aluminum were desperately needed for fighters and bombers. This meant the plane would have to be built almost entirely of wood. The challenge galvanized Hughes, building a wooden transport plane larger than any aircraft in history. It was the ultimate defiance of both physics and military skepticism. He shook hands with Kaiser, and the impossible partnership was sealed. 2. The Wooden Wonder: Design and Materials. The design specifications for the HK-1, Kaiser Hughes 1, were staggering. The wingspan alone was projected to be 320 feet, longer than a football field, end zone to end zone. It would have 8 engines, massive Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Majors, each a 28-cylinder powerhouse, the largest and most complex piston engines of the era. The crucial constraint was the material. The government was adamant: no aluminum, no steel. The plane would have to be made of wood. Immediately, the public and the press latched on to the material, derisively nicknaming the project the Spruce Goose. The moniker was deeply misleading and stung Hughes. He called it the Spruce Goose, but it's actually birch and not spruce at all. There is no spruce in it, save perhaps in a few tiny reinforcing members. The actual construction material was birch laminated with resin, a type of advanced plywood called Duramold. This process involved taking thin layers of veneer, applying a plastic resin adhesive, and shaping them in heated molds under high pressure. The result was a material stronger, pound for pound, than aluminum, and far more resistant to the harsh, salt-laden environment of maritime operations. It was a triumph of chemical and structural engineering hidden within a seemingly rustic package. Hughes quickly established a massive construction site in Culver City, California, near his Hughes Aircraft Company headquarters. Here, amidst wartime secrecy, the world's largest wooden structure began to take shape. The molds. To create the vast curving surfaces of the hull and wings, engineers had to build colossal molds. These forms, themselves structures the size of small buildings, were precision crafted to ensure every Duramold section mated perfectly. The workers. The workforce swelled to over 3,000 employees. They were master carpenters, cabinet makers, boat builders, and aeronautical engineers, all working together in a fusion of old-world craft and cutting-edge aerospace technology. The project, however, was immediately plagued by Hughes's meticulous, often infuriating perfectionism. His HK-1 was not just a plane, it was an extension of his own genius, and he was determined that every component be flawless. I. The Split and the Slowdown, 1943 to 1944. The partnership with Henry Kaiser quickly frayed. Kaiser was a man of rapid production, a pragmatist focused on delivering something to the war effort as quickly as possible. Hughes was a maximalist, driven by an engineering idealism that refused to compromise. Kaiser wanted a plane that could be put into service immediately, even if it meant a less sophisticated design. Hughes saw the HK-1 as his legacy, a machine that had to be the absolute pinnacle of aviation technology. When Hughes began making substantial and time-consuming design changes, such as moving from a twin-tail design to a single enormous vertical stabilizer, Kaiser's patience evaporated. By 1944, Kaiser had seen enough of the delays and the spiraling costs. The war was turning in the Allies' favor, and the immediate, desperate need for the flying boat was receding with the sinking of fewer ships. Kaiser officially withdrew from the project. Hughes, never one to retreat from a challenge, took over the entire operation, renaming the aircraft the H-4 Hercules. He personally guaranteed the necessary funding, pouring millions of his own dollars into the project. The decision cemented his personal ownership of the colossal aircraft, but it also painted a massive target on his back. The project, once a wartime necessity, now appeared to the public and Congress as a colossal vanity project. The work moved from Culver City to a massive, custom-built, climate-controlled hangar in Long Beach, California, on the edge of the harbor. Here, amidst wartime secrecy, the world's largest wooden structure began to take shape. IV. The Duel in D.C., the Senate Showdown of 1947. The war ended in 1945, long before the H-4 was anywhere near completion. The initial urgency, the U-boat threat, vanished, leaving the massive wooden flying boat exposed to the harshest judgment of all, public and congressional scrutiny. Why, 2 years after VJ Day, was the government still spending money on a giant wooden airplane? The initial contract had cost the American taxpayer a total of $18 million.
The star antagonist was Senator Owen Brewster of Maine, a powerful, portly man who chaired the subcommittee. He was determined to expose Hughes for alleged misuse of government funds, paint him as a playboy industrialist, and discredit the H-4 project once and for all. The hearings in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1947 became the American spectacle of the year. For 6 electrifying days, the nation tuned in to listen to the duel between the seasoned politician and the eccentric, fiercely intelligent tycoon. The accusations and the defense. Senator Brewster fired the opening salvo, laying out the numbers: millions spent, nothing delivered. He hammered Hughes on the delays, the changes in design, and the lingering public nickname, the Spruce Goose. Hughes, in a rare public appearance, was combative, sharp, and astonishingly prepared. He didn't just defend his aircraft, he went on the offense, turning the spotlight onto Senator Brewster's own motives. Hughes alleged that Brewster had ties to Pan American World Airways, a major rival to Hughes's own airline, TWA. In a moment that electrified the hearing room, Hughes charged that Brewster had offered to drop the entire investigation if Hughes would agree to merge TWA with Pan Am and support certain pro-Pan Am legislation. The senator vigorously denied the claim, but the damage was done. Hughes had skillfully transformed the hearing from an investigation into his business practices into a dramatic tale of corporate espionage and political corruption. In his most famous testimony, Hughes stared directly into the cameras and addressed the colossal plane. The Hercules was a monumental undertaking. It is the largest aircraft ever built. It has been a much greater job than I expected. I have my reputation rolled up in it, and I have stated that if it was a failure, I will probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it. Hughes was not just fighting for a contract. He was fighting for his honor and his place in aviation history. The public, always fond of a scrappy individual fighting the man, rallied to his side. The hearings were permanently adjourned without a final report, but the political battle left Hughes with one burning imperative. He had to make the plane fly. V. The Monster on the Move, the Assembly at Long Beach. The political drama set the stage for the engineering finale. The Hercules, still in pieces, had to be moved from the inland Culver City hangar to the Deepwater Harbor in Long Beach, a distance of 28 miles. This logistical challenge was a feat of civil engineering nearly as difficult as building the plane itself. A parade of giants. The entire fuselage, the wings, and the tail structure were broken down into sections, then loaded onto specialized multi-wheeled bogies. The immense tail fin, nearly 5 stories high, was transported separately. The move itself took over a month. Traffic lights, utility poles, and even some small buildings had to be temporarily moved or dismantled along the route. Thousands of bewildered Southern Californians lined the streets to watch the parts of the gigantic wooden structure slowly trundle toward the coast, a moving monument to American ambition and eccentricity. Once in Long Beach, the pieces were brought to the mammoth, climate-controlled hangar Hughes had constructed at Pier E. This facility, designed to maintain a perfect environment for the Duramold structure, was where the final meticulous assembly took place. Engineering the impossible scale. The scale demanded innovation. The control systems. A typical airplane uses cables and pulleys for controls. On the H-4, the control surfaces, the rudder, elevators, and ailerons were so massive that they could not be moved by human strength alone. Hughes's team pioneered an advanced hydraulic power boost system. This allowed the pilot to command the giant wings and tail with manageable force, essentially creating the first-ever power steering for an aircraft. The engines, the 8 R-4360 Wasp Majors, each mounted in its own nacelle on the impossibly long wing, needed to be synchronized and controlled. Their total power horsepower was 24,000, enough to power a small town. The propeller blades, carved from wood and finished with a silver-gray coating, were themselves 17 feet in diameter. Finally, in the late autumn of 1947, the H-4 Hercules was complete. It sat in its dock, a behemoth with a wingspan of 320 feet, a length of 219 feet, and an empty weight of 250,000 pounds. It was, by any measure, the largest aircraft ever built. VI, The Proof in the Flight, November 2, 1947. The date for the taxi tests was set, Sunday, November 2, 1947, and the event was treated like a Hollywood premiere, drawing thousands of spectators to the beaches and boats surrounding the Long Beach harbor. The air was thick with skepticism and excitement. Hughes had two objectives: to run low-speed taxi tests to check water handling and control, and to perform high-speed tests to check stability. He had emphatically stated he would not fly that day. The aircraft had not completed all its structural tests, and the initial goal was simply to prove it was a functioning boat. A total of 32 people were on board for the test runs, including the flight crew, engineers, and a nervous contingent of reporters and industry executives. The plane was designated NX 37602.
The unannounced ascent. With Hughes himself at the controls, the Hercules began its first run. The massive pontoons sliced through the water, creating a monumental wake. The controls were responsive, and the enormous wooden hull proved seaworthy. Hughes completed the first run, turned the aircraft, and lined up for the second. The second run was faster. The 8 Wasp major engines roared in unison, generating a sound that spectators later described as the Earth itself groaning. The hull lifted up on the step, planing across the water's surface, a crucial hydrodynamic phase. It was a success. At this point, a few reporters, desperate to file their stories about the successful taxi trials, disembarked. Howard Hughes then lined up for the final high-speed run of the day. Co-pilot Dave Brandt, a hydraulics engineer, sat beside him. As the plane sped across the water, the skepticism and derision of the Spruce Goose nickname seemed to push Hughes to an irreversible decision. He advanced the throttles. The aircraft thundered, leaving the protective embrace of the harbor. Suddenly, Hughes pulled the yoke back, a maneuver completely unscheduled, unannounced, and unexpected by anyone, perhaps even by his own flight crew. The giant machine responded. The massive wings bit into the air. With a roar that drowned out the gasps of the onlookers, the H-4 Hercules lifted free of the water. It rose to an altitude of approximately 70 feet above the waves, flying for about a mile at a speed of 135 miles per hour. For 26 seconds, the Spruce Goose was airborne, defying every critic, every senator, and every structural engineer who claimed a wooden plane of that size could never leave the water. Hughes brought the aircraft down gently, splashing back into the harbor. He had proved his point. The largest wingspan in the world was not a folly, it was a functioning aircraft. When asked by the remaining stunned reporters why he flew, Hughes simply replied, "I wanted to show that son of a bitch it could fly." The telescope wrote. In the Scope Show, the telescope wrote in performances designed to elicit confessions from victims in play trials. It is important to note that the telescope was not a suitable instrument for writing, and the performances were unrehearsed and unscripted. The idea was to force the victims to write their confessions, but this was often difficult. When the victims weren't able to write, the telescope would intervene and write their confessions for them. The stories from this time contain many gaps between the events, and the ISO was used to fill in these gaps. This allowed the telescope to continue the performance even when the victims were unable to write. The telescope was an important part of the play trials, and its stories provide a valuable glimpse into this period of history.